Okay, so I'm taking note of where all these pieces are. Two screws are fairly close together and that post is over the other side, so I shouldn't be able to get those mixed up very easily. So remove those two screws. They're shoulder screws. They've got a shoulder there that this lever is trapped under. See if I can get that loose with a pair of tweezers. Apparently not. I'll need the screwdriver. I think this one will probably do it. Yep. And that screwdriver is just a screwdriver that's had a slot cut into the centre of the blade to allow it to engage with a post like that. Right, this lever should come out. It does, and I can clean all these components with a bit of naphtha, and then you can have the joy of putting everything back together again. It shouldn't be too bad because the mechanism was working before I started. Now there's a bit of something in here. It's like lacquer. It's certainly not grease. I don't know where that's sprung from. I've got to get rid of anything like that. You don't want any bits and pieces of stray rubbish in here because it'll stop things moving smoothly. This is a bit scratched in here. That's where someone's had their screwdriver tip in here or tweezers in there and they've dug into that aluminium. I'm going to have to use a bit of acetone on there to get rid of that. There is something like lacquer in there. Someone's tried to possibly to seal the retainer ring in place with a touch of lacquer. It wouldn't have been a clever thing to do, but people do these things. So I'll just use a bit of acetone, see if I can get rid of the traces of that lacquer that's been used in here. Oh yes, certainly is. That's weird. When using lacquer to seal things in place is a useful move where something may have the potential to rattle loose, either because you know that they've rattled loose in the past, or components of that nature you've seen them rattle loose in other situations. But it's not something you'd normally get into as a matter of course, locking screws with lacquer. I'm just cleaning this housing inside and out with naphtha here just to get rid of grease and rubbish. These depth of field pointers, because the two pointers counter rotate, they can have quite a bit of resistance if there's anything preventing or restricting the free movement of one of the pointers and you're pushing on the other pointer in order to move it. You can find that things just bog up. They just do not want to move. I think that's okay. I'm just going to clean this arm. And this arm couples to the settings lever in the shutter so that it follows the aperture setting. Because the depth of field, of course, changes as you change your aperture. Right, let's start with that, see how we get on. That moves quite freely. I don't think really that would need any lubrication at all, but I'm just going to wipe that lightly with molybdenum paste. There's hardly anything there. Okay, so our 3 screws that held that thing in place. 2 of them are close together here and here, so we'll get those screws in place. This is only a very thin aluminium section here, so do not go crazy doing your screws up, because otherwise you will strip them out. And because these are shoulder screws, good luck finding another screw to replace them if you make a mess of it. It's not sitting correctly. That's better. That moves nice and freely. I'll check those other 2 screws. Check that one. That's good. Now I'll have to start assembling the components into here. Now each of these components has got to be nice and clean and free from grease. First, this pointer. If there's grease on these components, it might move nice and smoothly at first, but eventually the grease will dry out to some extent, and then you can rest assured things will stick after that and never move smoothly again. Get this seated. Should drop right down to the bottom and couple to the lower of the gears. There's a set of counter-rotating gears here. That seems fine, and the spring should go on there. Making sure I've got no threads of cotton or anything on there, and I've got to get this spring seated over that post. That was easy. Suspicious when things go as easy as that. To hook this spring onto that little tab on the ring there. Now this piece, this is a separator that separates the 2 pointers. So I'd said they counter rotate, so if you didn't have something in there to separate them, you'd probably have a good deal more friction. Now that has a bit of a slippery feel to it, so it's probably graphited or something at some stage. I think that'll be fine just as it is. Now this locates where? Against something. Is it there? Probably. Now that's symmetrical, that piece, so it doesn't, you can put it in either way. That's good. Now the little cam, that follows this little track over here. So I normally just give that a wipe with a bit of smear with a little bit of molybdenum paste. And we have a little pin, the small pin sticks up, and I think it goes up. Is it that way up? Yeah, I think it must be. Let's sit on there. think it does. Yep. That's it. It's got to be seated over that pin, and the large pin goes in that slot. That's good. It's different from working on the lenses with that mechanism because that pin couples to another part. Right, so the second pointer, this is a bit dirtier too. Second pointer goes in, and that little pin on the cam that's sticking up has to couple into this slot here. That's it. I'm checking the position of these two pointers to make sure that the ends of their travel, and they appear to be symmetrical there. This one looks slightly skewer. I don't know whether that's an illusion or not. It looks like that arm's been bent slightly. If it works perfectly there, I'm doing nothing about it. Could that go one notch over? No, it can't. That's got to be right. Okay. So far so good, I think. Now the retainer plate, I'm going to have to clean this, and this will have everything on it. There was lacquer and other rubbish floating around loose. There'll be some on this retainer plate for sure. I'm just going to wipe this with some naphtha first to remove any loose oil. I can see some lacquer or some rubbish in the centre there. I'll have to attack that with some acetone. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so that's lifted that off. Where's my acetone? I've got no idea what people will be doing here. It's funny, it's a green colour. It's like a lacquer. It's dried. It comes off in tiny shreds like it was plastic or something. I think that's good. Everything's still seated correctly. I'll put that plate in place. Now its retaining ring, which is here, I'll clean that in the same way. This is covered in alignment scratches that someone's put into it. It clearly can only go in one way round. Does this move smoothly? Yes, it does. Does it move smoother than it did before we started? Well, I don't know. I think it's about the same, really. But the main thing is we've ensured that it is clean and moving smoothly. So whether it needed to be done or not, it's been done. Assembling the rest of the shutter. Well, these rings, I want to clean these with a bit of naphtha, I think. I'm getting cotton buds here with lacquer and with acetone and all sorts on them, trying to keep them sorted. That's our shutter speed settings ring. And this is the ring that has our aperture settings on it and our EV values, our exposure values from the meter, where we'd set those on this ring. That looks okay. It's got one little notch on here which couples with this little tab on the aperture settings ring there, like that. This notch couples with the shutter speed settings cam plate at that point. Let's get that wriggled into position. That's it. Just checking if I've got this on the right way round. Yes, it can only go one way. The settings ring for the shutter speeds goes on here, couples there. It seems okay. Now, this piece, the fork couples to a pin down in here on the aperture settings plate. Let me see if I can see it from the top. That's it there. And this only fits on one place on the front of the shutter because it's got a little locating stud. And it's not doing it at the moment, so I've got something not quite right. What have I done? Oh, this is lifted. Okay, that was preventing it from coupling. There's a post here that comes right through from the mechanism plate and it couples into a slot here on this front ring and locates it. Now there's a ball here that gives us our detents for the shutter speed settings. I'm just going to put a spot of molybdenum paste in there. You could get away with graphite grease or a lot of other things. I'm giving a wipe of molybdenum paste to those detents on that shutter speed setting plate here, the cam plate. Pick up this ball without losing it. Stick it in there and hope it stays there. Where's my aperture lever? There it is. That's coupled. But this isn't seating on the front of the shutter correctly. If I've got my shutter speeds That shutter speed settings plate is shifted again. Let's see if I can rotate that into position. That's better. Why can't I get this seated? Oh, it just fell into place. Just dropped into place. Right, the retainer ring. To get this started, because it's down inside the recess there, so it's hard to get your fingers around it to get it to start. And I don't dare lift my other hand because I'm holding the shutter all together. See if I can get that started. No, I thought it was, but it wasn't. A friction tool might do it. A friction tool did do it. Okay. Okay, so my depth of field pointers move nicely. My shutter speeds have got a nice detent to them. My aperture, is that moving? Yes, it is. Okay, let's just check this retainer plate. Does it need to be a bit tighter? What if the detents on the shutter speeds are your best indication? That feels okay there. I don't think that needs to be any tighter. Which means that I can put the lock screw in place for the retainer ring. And that shutter now just lacks the lens. That's all good. I'm pleased with that. Okay, so it still cocks and fires. Yes, it does. That's good. I'll give that a wipe in here again with some naphtha to remove any fingerprints that I may have left. That retainer's in place, everything else is in place. Those scars on that retainer ring there, now they're completely hidden from everybody except your next technician that's going to be in here. There's absolutely no point in disguising them with paint. It's not like on a Retina 3C camera where they would be visible to anybody who changed the lens. These could only be visible to someone who dismantled the camera, which is not likely to be your end user, and therefore there's no reason to cover those scratches up with paint like the last person or the person before them had done so, because all that does is create problems for the next person to repair it. Okay, that's all good. So we have our rear lens group here, and that looks quite clean, and the middle lens group here. Now I need to clean the thread of that, because obviously I want to get rid of the grease, the old grease, before I put this in place. And I'll clean that glass. There's a bit of marking on the coating there that may or may not clean away, but I think I'll have a go at that first. First I'll clean around the mount with some naphtha to get rid of all that old grease that's in there. Now it's graphite grease by the looks of the colour of that. I'll probably be using some helical grease in there. Now you could use just about anything for that thread. Front self-focusing lenses typically do not they're not as sensitive to the type of grease you use as a helical thread would be. There's smaller area of contact. You're not sweeping the same area, and so they're less likely to be sensitive to a grease that's a bit thicker and is more viscous. So this should go well. Okay, that's looking quite good. Now I don't want to wipe inside this mount with anything other than naphtha and glass cleanup because I don't want to remove that black paint. Where it has been damaged, I'm just going to touch that up with a marker pen now. It's not significant enough to be worth pulling out the matte black paint. It doesn't require that. So glass cleaner. Oh, well, that glass, I've cleaned that lens, put that in place, that looks good. I'm just going to use a pair of stiff tweezers to tighten that up. It doesn't require any more than that. It certainly didn't require the force that somebody had used previously. Now I'm just going to touch up the missing black with a marker pen here. That's all that's required. You just don't want any bright surfaces in there scattering light about, and there wouldn't be many. There's the lens, the front group screws down in there fairly well. So I mean there wasn't really much scope for light scatter anyway, but that'll deal to it. That's nice. So that's our middle group in place. Our rear group is simple. I'll just clean this, clean that glass, screw that straight in place.